Recording in progress.
Unit 6.1.2, the media, the state, and state censorship. Now, let me show you how this looks like when we talk about our syllabus, because this is, again, we're doing this from a particular book. And if we open up your syllabus looks like this. We're talking about censorship, and we're talking about the state's involvement over here, right? We're talking about censorship and we're talking about the state's involvement. Have a closer look at your syllabus. Let's take this ahead. Let me show you this part of your syllabus as well. Now, moving on. The media, the state, and state censorship. Like we've discussed in the previous unit that was 6.1.1, we had spoken about how there was a difference between the political structure of a particular country, how does that political structure impact the amount of liberty and freedom that the media in a particular country has, right? Or in other words, if you remember, what we had spoken about was the chances of media having more of liberty and freedom when it comes to a democratic society, a democratic country, as compared to a country that worked on or that operated on authoritarian principles. So we would broadly divide this into two categories over here. Number one, we talk about authoritarian regimes. This part, we'd move on and we'd then talk about democratic regimes. This part, right? One, authoritarian regimes. Number two, democratic regimes. And while we'd be discussing authoritarian regimes, we'd also talk about censorship. I hope everyone has a clear-cut idea about what we're up to. Now, taking this a step ahead, when we talk about authoritarian regimes, of course, how can we miss on Kim Jong-un? I'm assuming everyone knows Kim Jong-un. Everyone has an idea about North Korea. When you talk about Kim Jong-un or when we talk about North Korea is referred to as, or is usually seen as, one of the strictest of country when it comes to the regulation of media, right? North Korea, I'm sure no one would question कि North Korea एक authoritarian regime है या नहीं है. North Korea totally है. Along with North Korea, we could use examples of Eritrea and Turkmenistan. In authoritarian regimes, the state usually seeks to control both the traditional and the new media. To remind you all, when we talk about traditional media, we're talking about books, we're talking about magazines, we're talking about newspapers. We could bring in radio over here, we could bring in television, so on and so forth, right? Likewise, when you talk about the new media, we are referring to the internet over here. And you could talk about Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, blogs, websites, messengers, so on and so forth, various platforms. So in authoritarian regimes, the state usually seeks to control both the traditional and the new media in order to control public opinion. Now, of course, this is pretty understandable if the state has immense amount of control over the media regulatory authorities or media regulation or how the media operates in a particular country. आप लोगों के opinion को control कर सकते हैं, आप agenda set कर सकते हैं, right? You could have clear-cut rules on what is to be shown and what is not to be shown. What is to be shown, how is it to be shown? Clear? What is newsworthy? ये सारी चीजें आप अपने agendas के basis पे media organizations के agendas होते हैं और media organization के जो agendas होते हैं, of course when you talk about an authoritarian regime, वहाँ पे आपकी state की बहुत ज़्यादा involvement होगी. Clear here? Now, in extreme cases such as North Korea, Eritrea, and Turkmenistan, there are no independent traditional media sources, and the government seeks to prohibit access to new media. Right? There are no in traditional there are no independent traditional media sources. Like in Pakistan, we have this ARY network, we have this Geo network, we have this Pole TV network, we have Hum TV, the Hum network, and I believe there's this Express something as well, right? So they're all independent. They're all independent from the government, independent, if not practically, theoretically, yes. Give it up. Because the media is quite controlled. It is. It is. There's currently 51 countries that are under. You'd have to check RSF. So yeah, moving on. There are no independent traditional media sources, and the government seeks to prohibit access to new media. For example, in North Korea, the Korean Central News Agency is the sole source, right? We're talking about the Korean Central News Agency. This Korean Central News Agency is the sole source of official news for the print and broadcast media, and the people are fed a daily diet of stories. People being fed a daily diet of stories extolling the virtues of its leader Kim Jong Un. Now, many of us would have an idea about this. Many of us have an idea about, I mean, I really like the way they've put this, fed a daily diet of stories. Now, people in North Korea, they are made to believe through the media, they're made to believe through the media that their supreme leader Kim Jong Un, how virtuous he is, how amazing he is, and how good he is for the state. According to the Open Net Initiative, online access within North Korea is exceedingly rare and limited to sites that comprise the domestic intranet, whose content is chosen and user activity monitored by the authorities. Clear here? Internet and intranet. Remember, the word over here is intranet, within the network. So we're talking about there being restrictions in terms of what people can view and what they cannot, again, which is very strictly monitored by authorities. Clear here? Moving on. However, according to Ortung and Walker, most authoritarian regimes today do not seek total domination of means of mass communication, because, North Korea, like I said, is an exception. Little do they care about what goes on around the world globally, right? But there are so many authoritarian regimes who would not want to directly dominate the media, who would not want a direct control over the media. Clear? I mean, you could bring in the neo-Marxist concept of hegemony over here as well, hegemonic control. Or hegemonic consent. Clear here? Most authoritarian regimes today do not seek total domination of all means of media communication. This is both because of a desire to avoid condemnation in the court of international opinion, right? And because of aspirations to economic modernization, right? Even when they're authoritarian regimes, they would not want to be condemned internationally. One. Number two, they're looking forward towards economic modernization. And steps like direct involvement or a close and a strict check on how the media operates in a country might not really work in their favor. Clear here? So the latter would be handicapped by wholesale media repression and the restriction on information flow that this would entail. Instead, according to Ortung and Walker, they want effective media control. Now we're talking about a comparison between total domination of media versus an effective media control, right? We're talking about a comparison between this and this. Clear here? When we talk about total domination, we spoke about countries like North Korea, Eritrea, and Turkmenistan. However, there are so many other authoritarian regimes who, the way I see it, would not want public condemnation, who would not want the people across the globe to have a bad impression about them or their country. Clear? Now, this effective media control, what exactly is this? This is enough amount of control for them to convey their strength and puff up claims to legitimacy while undermining potential alternatives. Clear? Now, taking it ahead, if we take this a step ahead, Ortung and Walker identify four distinct audiences that authoritarian controlled media seek to influence. There are four different audiences that they are trying to seek control over. To name them, we have the elites, the general population, the political opposition, and regular internet users. Right? We're talking about four distinct type of audiences. Here are they. Clear, dear? Now, regime elites. Authoritarian governments need to reassure elite groups that they are in control and warn potential opponents among the elite that any defections will be punished. For example, through smear campaigns, because any splits could lead to regime collapse. Clear, dear? The people, the elite, the social group in the society that you know is powerful to gather others or to end up being problematic for you, but at the same time, time and again, through the media, they need to give them, or they feel like it's important to give them reminders कि किसी भी तरह का अगर वो revolt या किसी भी तरह का वो opposition की तरफ जाएंगे तो the government or the state is strong enough to take care of them. Clear, dear? Number two, the general population. G. This part. Now, regime elites, or in other words, the rich, the powerful people, could be businessmen, could be people who are powerful, relatively powerful enough if you compare them with the general population, but at the same time, वो सारे अक्सर divided होते हैं. They are, that's how things go on in Pakistan as well. These big industrialists, these businessmen, they know if they want things to work in their favor, if they want policies that work in their favor, they need to show their constant support to the state. And the media is an important tool that is used by the state to keep on reminding this elite about the position they hold in a society, and at the same time, in a very subtle manner, to warn them if they stand up against the state would not accept that. Clear? Now, moving on, the general population. The general population, that is state-dominated media, are used to make mass audiences both fear and respect the regime at the same time as encouraging political apathy and passivity. Clear? The general population, right? The general population, like this says, according to Ortung and Walker, the general population is again an important audience for the media. They're an important audience for the media because the media wants to keep them informed, wants to give them constant reminders about how they are to be like, how they're not expected. Yeah, how they're not expected to get involved into things that they're not expected to get involved into, how they're expected to stay passive and let the state, let the government decide what works better for the state and them. And this is done through fear and respect of the regime. The state would want to show the general population what they're capable of doing to them. And at the same time, trying to gain the respect by making them believe whatever it is, whatever decision it is that is taken by the government is actually taken in favor of the general population. Clear, dear? Number three, the political opposition and independent civil society organizations. Political opposition. Where these exist, the state and media are used to try to discredit in the public's mind any opposition to the regime, painting opponents as corrupt, self-interested, or as agents of malign foreign powers. Right now, for instance, if we talk about the involvement PTV has, PTV would deliberately not, let's just say, PTV, Pakistan Television Network, the national television channel of Pakistan, you'd always seeing it take sides with whoever's there in the government and not the opponents. Elections होते हैं, नई government आती है तो नई government की side लेना शुरू हो जाएगी. And they would deliberately want to show the sitting government in a positive manner. And at the same time, they would try to discredit, or they would try to not show the power that the opposition has. Clear? कोई भी opposition का protest होता है, कोई भी ऐसी चीज होती है, तो आपको जो state run television network होता है, आपको नजर आएगा कि वो उसके ऊपर ज्यादा फोकस नहीं कर रहे होंगे. किसी भी दिन आप खबरें उठा के सुन लें PTV network पे, you'd get to know more about the role our sitting government or the role our prime minister is playing in terms of making our country better, bringing in economic stability, improving the relationship with neighboring countries, coming up with state policies and foreign policies that eventually are going to make our country better. Clear? So the political opposition and independent civil society organizations, they are the state-run media. What it does is it discredits in the public's mind any opposition to the regime, right? किसी भी तरह की opposition regime की तरफ नजर आती है तो उसको discredit करने की कोशिश करती है, right? Painting opponents as corrupt, self-interested, or as agents of malign foreign powers. The fourth one, regular internet users. As the number of people online grows, authoritarian governments have realized that they need to at least control politically sensitive online content as well as that of the press and broadcasting. You know, there are every other day there are new what do you call it, guidelines, especially in our neighboring country India. आपका कोई भी political opinion हो या आपका कोई भी particular political का party या किसी आपकी state की institution, आपके state की judiciary हो गई, आपके state का law enforcement agencies हो गई, किसी भी state की institution के खिलाफ बोलने का मौका usually नहीं दे रहे होते, right? जी बेटा, you were saying something.
Users can be included in YouTubers suggestion for the newer content.
Yes.
So to give a political statement without the restrictions, not the content, the other type of content.
I mean, there's a check on them as well.
There is.
If it is not in the national interest, if it is by any means a threat to the national interest, it would be taken care of. It again depends from country to country. Moving on, we're talking about censorship over here. Writing in the introduction of attacks on the press, the new phase of censorship. Look at this book. Produced by the International NGO Committee to Protect Journalists, Simon 17 that strategies used by authoritarian and hybrid states to control and manage information fall into three broad categories. These are the three broad categories we talked about. This is the first one, this is the second one, and we have the third one, right? But before I show you Mr. Simon, have a look at this. Now, writing in the attacks on the press, the new phase of censorship produced by the international NGO, the Committee to Protect Journalists, Joel Simon claims that strategies used by authoritarian and hybrid states to control and manage information fall into three broad categories, right? We are talking about strategies that are used to control and manage information. Number one, repression 2.0, new forms of direct censorship and the intimidation and or imprisonment of critical journalists. They are similar to the direct control of the media exercised by the Communist Party in the former Soviet Union before Mikhail Gorbachev came to power. Again, if someone goes against you, you imprison them, intimidate them. Clear? Where critical journalism is not accepted. Do you guys get this? Now, moving on. Number two, masked political control. Systematic efforts to hide repressive actions. Systematic efforts. See, over here, आपके पास overt किस्म का reaction था, right? It was direct. It was on the face. Over here, the second one, masked political control, systematic efforts to hide repressive actions taken against the media by dressing them in the cloak of democratic norms. For example, justifying an internet crackdown by claiming that it is necessary to suppress hate speech, incitements to violence, or to tackle terrorism. This is the more popular one these days. Whatever you do in the name of the sovereignty of the country, in the name of betterment towards the society, in the name of national security. Clear, dear? Now, in Turkey, the example, according to RSF, since the failed coup of July 2016, the authorities have used the fight against terrorism as a pretext for eliminating dozens of media outlets and imprisoning dozens of journalists, right? Like I said, in the name of. Clear here? Any question? Number three, technology capture. Using digital technologies to stop internal dissent by monitoring and surveilling critical voices, blocking websites, and using state-sponsored trolling. According to the 2016 Freedom on the Net report produced by Freedom House, 2/3 of the world's internet users live in countries which blocked or restricted access to social media sites and communication services during that year. Do you understand this? We spoke about three different categories over here that were put forward by Joel Simon. The first one was direct form of control, right? The second one, that was repression 2.0. The second one, my dear, had more to do with getting what you want to get done, but again, not making it very obvious. Clear? Keeping people under an impression, keeping the general population under an impression that whatever's being done, whatever actions are being taken are pretty necessary and these actions are being taken to make these actions are being taken for some betterment, right? Now, according to 2016 Freedom on the Net, produced by Freedom House, 2/3 of the world's internet users live in countries which blocked or restricted access to social media sites and communication services during that year. Do we all understand this? So this third point over here is technology capture. The second point over here was masked political control, which pretty much explains this. And the first one was repression 2.0. These were put forward by Joel Simon in his book, Attacks on the Press, the New Face of Censorship, right? These are the strategies, my dear. These are the strategies that, according to Joel Simon, authoritarian regimes or even hybrid states, these strategies are being used by them to control and manage information. Clear, dear? Now, taking it ahead, to this list might be added a fourth category named self-censorship, where journalists avoid criticizing the regime through fear of harassment or because of financial considerations. According to the NGO, World Association of News Publishers, here you go. According to the NGO, the World Association of Newspapers and News Publishers in Malawi and Cambodia, for example, governments use the threat of withdrawing state advertising from independent media outlets. Now, state advertising, government अपनी state advertisement उस particular media organization से हटा देगी. So financial constraints की वजह से they have all the reasons to not stand up against the government, not publish, not show anything that is not in line with the government policies. Or in other words, if there's anything that puts the sitting government in a positive light, they might as well broadcast it. However, on the other hand, if there's something that is not in line, or if there's any mistake, or if there's any policy that the government came up with which has ended up doing less good and more bad, simply let go of it. You could also say this could be an example of gatekeeping in a subtle manner. Gatekeeping in the sense that they're allowing good things about the government to be seen by people, and at the same time, whatever does not work in favor of the government to simply discard it. So we're talking about countries like Malawi and Cambodia, for example. Governments use the threat of withdrawing state advertising from independent media outlets as a tool to pressurize them to avoid criticizing the government. Clear, dear? Moving on. The Freedom on the Net report referred to above identified China as the country with the most restrictions on internet freedom. China has comprehensive internet censorship system known colloquially as the Great Firewall of China that seeks to control both internet traffic originating outside of China and internal traffic. Now, everyone sitting over here does have an idea about how China is strict when it comes to internet usage, right? Get this here? Even in countries like, VPN, I'm assuming all of us know what VPN is. VPN is virtual private network. Pakistan ke andar bhi, I'm sure you all have an idea. If you guys remember, there was a time jab aapke paas YouTube block ho gaya tha. There was a time jab aapke paas koi bhi ek particular political, koi bhi ek particular media channel agar block ho jata hai, to people get the job done or get access to it through VPNs, right? But then again, using VPNs is not allowed. It's illegal. Clear? Until recently, tech-savvy Chinese internet users had been able to bypass the government's efforts to block foreign websites by using what are known as virtual private network services, or VPNs. However, since 2018, new laws require that all VPNs operators are licensed by the government. Moreover, the state-run telecom companies, that is China Mobile, China Unicom, and China Network, China Telecom. We're talking about this, we're talking about this, and we're talking about this, have required to ensure that 1.3 billion subscribers cannot have access blocked content with VPNs. Clear, dear? VPN unko? No, they need to make their system strong enough that no one can bypass it. I mean, of course, if he or she is caught, they'd be held responsible. I'm sure there are many countries. It's illegal in the UAE as well. Well, you're sharing a personal. Yes, if it's not allowed, it's because you're bypassing the restrictions that the government has put on you. So moving on, we talk about democratic regimes. Let me take you back from where we started from. This is where we started from. Remember when I said initially we'd start off with authoritarian regimes. Within this, we'd speak about censorship. And now finally, we're moving on towards democratic regimes. Now, if we talk about these democratic regimes relatively, as it looks like, these democratic regimes, they allow more of liberty, they allow more of freedom to these media organizations, and of course to the users, to the media users like listeners, viewers, internet users, if you're talking about new media. Clear? Now, if we move on towards democratic regimes, are they as democratic as the name suggests? Question mark. State controlled, including state censorship of the media, is generally seen as incompatible with democracy in times of time, at least in times of peace. So what we're talking about is state censorship, usually in times of peace, democratic societies mein nahi hoti. Now, I don't know if you will be able to relate to this. We had, I mean, I clearly recall when Parvez Musharraf, General Musharraf, he was taking over. उसकी अगर आपने कोई वीडियो वगैरह क्लिप वगैरह देखी है टीवी पे या यूट्यूब पे, तो there's this very famous clip जिसके अंदर they're showing these individuals, uniformed individuals, they're getting access to the, I think it was PTV network in Islamabad. They were trying to gain, I mean, they had access to it. आपके पास total censorship, total आपके पास media बंद हो गया था. To remind you, आपके पास प्री मुशर्रफ एरा के अंदर मीडिया पाकिस्तान के अंदर इतना मतलब इंडिपेंडेंट मीडिया इतना था ही नहीं. आपके पास ये सारे ARY, हम टीवी एक्सप्रेस वगैरह ये सारे चैनल्स नहीं थे. Back then we used to rely on PTV. And when the majority of your country is relying on the state television network and you somehow hijack it, if that's the right word, you have control over a lot. They did gain control. They did have control over it, succeed in getting control over it. And they blocked it, I believe, for, I don't exactly recall, but it was for an hour or so. And then finally, Mr. Musharraf was seen on the screen. So what we discussing over here is कि जब हम बात करते हैं democratic regimes की या जब हम बात करते हैं democratic societies की, तो democratic societies के अंदर at least in times of peace, आपको state censorship की जरूरत नहीं पड़ती, right? आपको state censorship की जरूरत नहीं पड़ती, इसलिए बेटा we are saying it is seen to be incompatible with democracy. It is not seen to be compatible with democracy. Clear? Now, Sebastian Steyer examines data relating to the situation in 149 countries over the period 1993 to 2010 and found that democracies lead to significantly high levels of media freedom than autocracies and other things being equal. So, according to Sebastian Steyer, he examined situation in 149 countries from 1993 to 2010, and what he found was कि अगर आप compare करते हैं autocracies को और democratic regimes को, तो आपके पास democratic regimes के अंदर there was a significantly high level of media freedom to be noted. Clear, dear? Now, does democracy mean the state has no role in media operations? Of course, the state has its role. Now, for instance, Pakistan ke andar bhi, like I say, we have PEMRA, right? This is not to say that the state plays no role in the operation of the media and democracies. The state may well pass laws which limit the freedom of the press. Clear, dear? Yeah. Now, we're talking about democratic regimes over here in ways which are seen as in the public interest. For example, hate speech legislation, it is also likely to pass laws limiting the ability of any company to monopolize a particular media sector. Now, the ability of any country to monopolize a particular media sector, you can pass laws related to this. I'm sure you all remember Rupert Murdoch. We have spoken about Murdoch earlier. Yeah, Rupert Murdoch, the once media tycoon.
So he's apparently poor now.
Relatively, the way he sees it. Yeah. So yeah, here you go. So
recently there was a film, I think एक दो दिन चली सिनेमा में पाकिस्तानी फिल्म जावेद इकबाल based on a serial killer, saying because it was about a real life serial killer in Pakistan. It was kind of like a documentary. It had a very, but it had dark scenes quite well.
So see that, what does that show? If we link that with this topic, it shows that even when we are a democratic country, yeah, perfect, it works well. So yeah, now one, hate speech legislations आप pass कर सकते हो. Number two, you could pass laws that limit the ability of any one company, right? Remember News Corporation by Rupert Murdoch? I'm not sure if the name is here, but we know the company News Corporation. यहाँ पे तो लिखा ही होगा News Corporation. Here you go, right? Now, do you know what? If there's one media organization, that is in control or that owns many different media outlets, don't you think आपके पास media plurality या media diversity आपकी threatened होगी, right? अगर एक ही organization, एक ही बड़ी company छोटी छोटी मीडिया ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस को एक्वायर करना शुरू कर दे, right? If you remember, we have discussed this earlier under the heading of concentration of ownership, right? So this concentration of ownership idea could be a problem. Now, the example that we had used when we were discussing this was of Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter too, and WhatsApp. Yeah, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, they're all owned by the same company. तो आपके पास डाइवर्सिटी कहाँ रही यहाँ पे?
Even on the apps,
मोनोपोली है जी.
Even the apps look also similar, like हर चीज को same बना दिया.
तो देखिए मोनोपोली हो जाती है ना आपकी. तो the state again has okay. So the state can again limit the ability of any one company to monopolize a particular media sector in order to ensure at least some media plurality. For example, in January 2018, the UK Competition and Markets Authority concluded that it was not in the public interest for 21st Century Fox to take over Sky Broadcasting. 21st Century Fox, owned by the Murdochs. अब अगर Sky Broadcasting भी Murdoch की कंपनी acquire कर देती है, तो don't you think it wouldn't really be in the best interest of the public? Don't you think आपके पास monotonous किस्म का content आ जाएगा? आपके पास similar agenda पे सारे operate यहाँ run कर रहे होंगे? In that case, the viewer, the user, the end user is pretty restricted or limited to the information that is being provided to him or her. In that case, don't you think it would eventually mean कि आपके पास whatever the company wants to show, it ends up showing? Of course, if it's directly something, or if it's something that's very obviously not in line with what the particular state or country allows, so it would be banned. But then again, in a very subtle manner, आप काफी agendas run कर रहे होते हो, जो eventually, yes, जो eventually it can affect the users. Clear? Now, for example, in January 2018, the UK Competition and Markets Authority concluded that it was not in the public interest. It was not in the public interest for 21st Century Fox to take over Sky Broadcasting. The CMA has provisionally found that if the deal went ahead as currently proposed, it is likely to operate against the public interest. It would lead the Murdoch family trust, which controls Fox and News Corporation, increasingly its control over Sky Broadcasting as well, so that it would have too much control over news providers. Considering this amount of control, considering this amount of or the ratio or the percentage of the control you have over whatever people see in a country, don't you think you could turn out to be super dangerous? Like super dangerous? Yes. TV, radio, online, and newspapers, and therefore too much influence over public opinion and political agenda. However, media freedom cannot be taken for granted in democracies, right? Media freedom cannot be taken for granted. The flip side of the coin. As indicated in the introduction to part 1, changes in government and in the political climate can lead to attacks on media freedom, even in democratic societies. Now, if you talk about Pakistan, Musharraf era took over a democratic or a publicly, or what do you call it, selected, yeah, election-based government, right? So जैसे ही आपके पास government switch हुई, आपके पास, if anything, पाकिस्तान के अंदर तो media freedom बढ़ गया था, क्योंकि then they allowed independent channels to grow. I mean, they allowed them to open up and then grow. So moving on, as indicated in the introduction to part 1, changes in government and in the political climate can lead to attacks on media freedom, even in democratic societies. In its accompanying analysis of the 2017 World Press Freedom Index, RSF states that violations of the freedom to inform are less and less the prerogative of authoritarian regimes and dictatorship. In other words, what we're talking about is the authoritarian regimes, or these regimes that are that are run by dictators, it's usually considered to be their right कि ये media freedom को violate करें. Clear here? Does everyone understand this? Now, among numerous examples, it draws attention to recent developments in Europe and the USA, where the rise of right-wing populism has seen the election of new conservative governments who are intolerant of media conservative. Now, this right-wing populism, left-wing populism, we just discussed this before we started this topic. Let me give you a quick idea about populism. Populism comes from the word populist. Populist means people. We're talking about a political agenda or a political strategy जिसके अंदर apparently you are the voice of people here. You are the voice of ordinary people which claim to speak up. See, like I said, apparently. A political strategy that involves support for traditional morality, a strong state, and laissez-faire capitalism, where there's less of involvement by the state when it comes to the economic affairs of a country, because you remember, this is apparently, as it looks like, for ordinary people. This is the voice of ordinary people. With anti-immigrant, why anti-immigrant? Because you'd always want your people, your locals, to be taken care of first before you could start accommodating immigrants. And nationalistic rhetoric, and which claim to speak up for the ordinary person against the elite. So moving on. Among numerous examples, it draws attention to recent developments in Europe and the USA, where the rise of right-wing populism has seen the election of new conservative governments who are intolerant of media criticism. अब ये सिर्फ examples हैं. Amongst these examples, we have other examples over here. We have USA का Donald Trump की example. We have an example from Poland, and we have an example from Hungary. Now, a typical question: do we need to learn all of them? Do we need to write all of them? Not necessarily, right? But mind it, if you're using these examples, if you are giving examples of what actually goes on around in this world, you're catering to, like I say, AO2, that is application of the content and interpretation. Have you interpreted the content the right way and applied it to support the answer that you're writing, or to support the point in the answer that you're writing? In the USA, everyone knows Donald Trump. In the USA, the election of Donald Trump has seen repeated attacks on journalists, and we all know about this. With Trump accusing them of being amongst the most dishonest humans beings on earth and of deliberately spreading fake news. In Poland, the election of the Law and Order Party in 2015 was followed by legislation bringing public radio and television under its control, and the replacement of the existing directors with government appointees. Clear here? Right, नई गवर्नमेंट आई, उन्होंने स्टेट मीडिया चैनल के ऊपर अपने लोग अपॉइंट कर दिए. It also acted to restrict the distribution of newspapers that were critical of the government, and ordered all state agencies to cancel their subscriptions and not place any advertisements in the targeted newspapers. That keeps on happening in Pakistan as well. Clear? Similarly, in Hungary, yeah, just in case if you need this after a minute. So yeah, similarly in Hungary, since the Fidesz party came to power in 2010, the government under Viktor Orban has sought to tighten its control over the media through legislation and through the purchase of independent media outlets by wealthy supporters of the government. Clear here? Controlling the media through legislation or purchase independent media outlets. Purchase them so that whatever they have to publish or show the audience next works in your favor. Clear here? Now, moving on. Let's talk about a contemporary issue over here, the state control of the media in Russia. When you talk about Russia, we all know, when we talk about Russia, we all know Putin. Just in case if you want to read. So yeah, you might as well want to read this. Even if you don't want to read this entire thing, whatever's highlighted, just have a look at that. Now, according to Kiltelly, there's less freedom of expression in Russia now than any time since the fall of the Soviet Union. So yeah, moving on. The role of the state in relation to media control in authoritarian regimes can be illustrated by the situation in Russia. The panel shown here above, this one, published by RSF, describes President Putin as a predator of press freedom and details some of the ways in which he has exercised control over the landscape in Russia since coming to power in 2000. This is another.
According to RSF, Russia has freedom of media, right?
No, it is the it's आपका the recent list that was published by them in 2021. यहाँ पे आपको देखें Press Freedom Predators Gallery, All Tyrants, 2 Women and a European. You'd see Putin over here. See, here he is. So we have Egypt, Belarus, Iran, Syria, Hong Kong, Nicaragua, Tajikistan, Sri Lanka, Turkmenistan, Bahrain, Cambodia, Azerbaijan, and Pakistan, Djibouti, Eritrea, Brazil, country, North Korea, Singapore, Cuba, Myanmar, Saudi Arabia, India, Vietnam, Venezuela, Cameroon, Rwanda, Thailand, Russia, Turkey, Philippines, Russia, again you were asking, Hungary, Equatorial Guinea, Bangladesh, South Sudan, China, and Uganda. So there would be. So yeah, this these are a couple of key terms that I'd want everyone to be aware of, not only to know them, not only knowing them, but being able to effectively use them while writing answers. A quick summary of what we just did. We have 2 points over here and 3 more over here. Just read through them.
So can you go back to the key terms for a minute?
To the key terms, I'll send this to you, don't worry, don't take pictures. Done?
Yes, sir.
So yeah, 3 more. So we've had this question in May, June 2021, the third variant. Media content is controlled primarily by governments. Now, whatever we just studied, it could be used in this particular answer. But then again, this particular question doesn't only, I repeat it, it doesn't only require content from what we just did, right? There's a lot more to it that could be added over here too, but because this has quite a lot that we just spoke about as well, I would want to give this a read and maybe we discuss this. Media content is controlled primarily by governments. Evaluate this view, a typical 35-mark question. The focus of the question is who controls the media, and specifically, wait, let me pick this up. And specifically, how much influence do governments nationally and or through supranational organizations have on media organizations? Candidates may distinguish between different types of political regimes, that is authoritarian versus democratic, for example. Authoritarian regimes usually exercise greater direct control over the media than in the case in democratic countries. Different means through which government can seek to control the media can be discussed. For instance, we could talk about censorship, funding, publishing and broadcasting laws, regulation, parliamentary scrutiny of media activities, so on and so forth. Evaluating how effective these means are, that's important. In helping governments control the media could form part of a good analytical response. Evaluation could also be provided by considering other social actors and agencies who might play a role in controlling the media, such as media owners, the editors, journalists, audiences, and non-governmental regulatory bodies. Good answers will draw conclusions about whether control of the media is concentrated in the hands of few, of one particular group or social agency, or whether the control is contested between different groups. That is typical Marxism versus pluralism. How far can government influence the process of control? If any, are the limits of government actions in relation to the media? Do you guys get this? Now have a look at the indicative content. Remember, this is just indicative content. Anything you write besides this and is in line with the demands of the question is accepted. So examples suggest that authoritarian regimes are often very successful in controlling the media. Democratic regimes usually show greater respect for media rights and freedoms and up to a point and happy to accept a free market in media content. Nevertheless, many direct and indirect means are available to democratic governments to control the media, including censorship, allocation of funding, regulatory supervision, and fines for media organizations that fail to conform to government regulations. Even democratic governments have intervened to shut down media outlets considered undesirable. We have examples. Ultimately, considerable power is available to national government to set the limits within which government organizations operate. The threat of government censure or closure alone may be sufficient to ensure that media organizations take care to avoid displeasing the authorities. Clear here? Governments are an important source of information for the media, and this is another consideration encouraging media organizations to align themselves with government ideas about how the media should operate. I mean, what if they don't give them access?
Yeah.
Right? Because a media organization would always want news, right? और अगर आप media organization, आपकी media organization को news चाहिए, और अगर आप उनका news का access ही बंद कर देते हैं, उनका news का access ही आप खत्म कर देते हैं, तो how do you expect the organization to be able to operate or run? Get it?
Yes.
Now, moving on. If we move on towards the against part over here, when we talk about this against part, media conglomerates tend to operate on a global scale, and that make it easier for them to avoid detained control by particular nation states. Media conglomerates, like if we talk about the News Corporation, he's everywhere. I showed you the list of his assets, the list of assets of News Corporation, right? I believe in the first class, right? I mean, that's available online as well. If at any point you want to go back and have a look at it. Democratic governments are not involved in the day-to-day running of media organizations and so have little influence over decisions taken by editors or journalists, right? Now see, democratic governments के अंदर the government can direct you कि भाईजान ये acceptable है, ये acceptable नहीं है. लेकिन जो मीडिया ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, किसी भी मीडिया ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की जो डे टू डे रनिंग है, उस मीडिया ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की डे टू डे रनिंग, उसके अंदर तो एक डेमोक्रेटिक गवर्नमेंट की इन्वॉल्वमेंट नहीं होगी. किस एजेंडा है, सटल तरीके से किस स्टैंड को, किस इशू को सपोर्ट कर रहे हैं, किस इशू को सपोर्ट नहीं कर रहे हैं, राइट? Overall, it would be unrealistic for democratic governments to seek to control the detailed production of media content. Next, democratic governments are accountable to the electorate, and measures such as censorship have not always proven popular with the wider population in countries where there's a high degree of support for media freedom. I mean, if you talk about comparison, आपके पास यूएस के अंदर लोग बोल बोल के थक गए हैं. एक तरफ से कहते हैं हेट स्पीच रिलेटेड लेजिस्लेशंस लेके आए, दूसरी तरफ से लोग कहते हैं भाईजान फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच है, right? Regulating the new media is another dimension, has so far proved challenging. Regulating new media, I gave you an example, the usage of proxies, VPNs. Clear? Challenging for national governments, partly because global networks such as the internet take control of the new media beyond national frontiers. To date, it looks like democratic governments have less control over the new media than they do over the traditional media. This may be changing as governments come under pressure to ensure tighter regulations of social networking sites to prevent unwelcome content from, for example, terrorist groups and political extremists. So yeah, this a lot of what we discussed, like I said earlier, could be used in a question like this, but then I wouldn't say जो कुछ हमने किया है वही सब इधर आएगा, because there's a lot beyond that as well. Let me remind you all again in a typical question that we get in paper 4, and a typical question that we get in paper 4, it's a 35 mark question. आपसे examiner कभी भी ऐसा सवाल नहीं पूछेगा जब तक आपके पास इतना content ना हो उस सवाल के जवाब में लिखने के लिए, right? And remember, it's just one question, 135 mark question. उस question के through whatever you know from that particular unit, you can actually put it to use, regardless, no restrictions, right? If you think any part of the unit, like literally any part of the unit, can be used in favor or against the arguments that you want to bring in, you're allowed to do so. But just keep a check with कि वो link करा question के साथ, right? Direct जबरदस्ती निकाल दें, exactly. Direct link करना question के साथ is very essential. I can't emphasize enough on this when I say जब आप answer लिख रहे हो, try to make a point that every what do you call it?
Point is linked to the question.
Every point is linked to the question. Yeah, every paragraph at least is linked to the question. आप कोई भी paragraph लिखते हैं, you make a point कि आप जो कुछ भी लिख रहे हैं वो उस question के हिसाब से और उसे आप clearly express कर रहे हैं, even if it means you having to bring in words from the questions over and over again. Do that. Keep the reader connected, keep the reader engaged, right? Let the reader know that the reader is is reading a question. The reader is actually reading a question from reading an answer to a question, and is not merely reading a summary from any book, right? किसी भी topic की reader जो एग्जामिनर है वो किसी भी टॉपिक की समरी नहीं पढ़ रहा, वो एक सवाल का जवाब पढ़ रहा है, ठीक है? तो जब आप अपने आप को इन सारी चीजों के बारे में, I mean, if you keep on reminding yourselves about all of this, it is surely going to help you. Do we all understand this?
Yes.
Now, wait a minute, I want to show you something else. So how do we let me just share this file, which has been shared with you earlier as well. A2 sociology के अंदर paper 4, this says religion over here, but religion और media दोनों आप paper 4 में करते हैं, so it's the same marking mechanism. Let me just quickly walk you through this. The marking criteria AO1, AO2, AO3. We all know AO1 is knowledge and understanding. AO1 is knowledge. I just write it down over here. AO1 is knowledge and understanding. AO2 is interpretation and application. AO3 is analysis and evaluation. So yeah, taking it ahead, this is how you are marked. For knowledge and understanding, you have 9 marks allocated. For interpretation and application, you have 11 marks allocated. For analysis and evaluation, you have 15 marks allocated. And this is how you are typically marked when you write a 35-mark answer. I am sending this to you. This has already been sent to you. This is already available on your group. Right now, these are the things that I suggest as you're preparing yourself for paper 4. You might as well want to take a printout of this, or you might want to write this down, copy this down somewhere, and then put it on your study desk. Put it on your study desk for a few days so that when you're writing an answer, you know what to do. You know what exactly is it that gets you marks and what is it that does not get you marks, right? So आपके पास knowledge and understanding year 1 के लिए total 9 marks allocated है, right? Is your knowledge good, and does your answer reflect good understanding? Response contains a range of detailed beliefs, good use of concepts, theories, research evidence. Now अगर आप compare करते हो इन 4 levels को, right? अगर आप इन 4 levels को compare करते हो तो see, this is good knowledge, this is reasonable knowledge, basic knowledge, and no knowledge. Yeah, once we're done with this. Do we get this here? And moving on, interpretation and application. आपके पास देखें 11 नंबर इंटरप्रिटेशन और एप्लीकेशन के. क्लियर? तो नॉलेज अंडरस्टैंडिंग, सी आप किताब से, कुछ बच्चे किताब से उठा के सिंपली लिखना शुरू कर देते हैं, कॉपी करते हो. बेटा अगर आप वो 100% सही भी कॉपी करते हो तो रिमाइंड योरसेल्फ यू जस्ट केटरिंग टू दिस. Right? You're just catering to what? 9 marks out of 35. What about this? Who's going to cater to the rest 26 marks? And this can only be learned by putting your pen to paper. A lot of reading, a lot of writing. If you're not reading enough, if you're not writing enough, this is not meant for you. There's no point even sitting for the paper then. Remember, your knowledge on the entire unit is being tested through this one question that is of 35 marks, right? आपको total कितना पता है, कितना नहीं पता, वो सिर्फ एक question से test होगा. तो जब हम बात करते हैं interpretation and application की, very good interpretation and application of relevant sociological material. The material selected will be accurately interpreted, consistently applied into the question with logic and well-informed manner. See, this says very good, reasonable, limited, no. Clear? Number 3, analysis and evaluation. Very good analysis and evaluation, clear and sustained analysis of the view, detailed and explicit evaluation, range of contrasting views and or evidence, good understanding of the complexity of the issues raised by the question. Yeah. So yeah, in the end, I'd say when you're reading a particular topic, you for now do not have a lot of questions that you've had through your past papers. But whenever you're going through a particular topic, just make a point, you give the questions a read first and see and try to figure out कि जो भी आप यहाँ से knowledge gain कर रहे हो, वो knowledge को आप किस हद तक और कहाँ पे apply कर सकते हो, right? One, and like I keep on saying, do not fear writing an answer. Your first answer cannot be your best answer. The more you read, the more you write, the better you keep on getting at it. Right? Your first answer can never be your best answer. For you to get to your best answer, you need to get started with the first. Right? So thorough reading, making notes would always help you, and a disciplined approach towards preparing for your examination has never failed. Not any that I know of. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the day. Take good care of yourself. Stay happy, healthy, safe, and protected. Stay humble, spread positivity, spread smiles, and Allah Hafiz.